All right, next up on our list for auditions, we have Eric Stevenson.
Yes. Hi. Hello. How you doing?
Yeah, okay. Can you go ahead and play us a paradiddle, please?
Yeah, sure. I can do that.
Okay. Play a little faster.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Faster.
Okay.
Not my tempo!
It's interesting how certain scenes from different movies can inform the way you think about the title of a different one. You guys remember the scene in Days of Future Past where Quicksilver has Magneto's head up against like this, and he's like, "I'm putting my hand against the back of your head so that you don't get whiplash." So that I don't get what? Whiplash. And now every time I watch Whiplash, that's all I can think about. Someone's like, "Hey, you want to watch Whiplash?" Oh, you mean Whiplash? So it's 2020 right now at the time of making this video, and Whiplash came out in 2014. And of all the movies that I've seen, and even within the 6 year span of which I've seen who knows how many more movies, this is still the most intense cinematic experience I have ever had. And I was actually watching this movie on my 13-inch MacBook Air. I was in my living room. I was sitting on a chair. I made sure that everyone had gone to bed so that no one could bother me. All the lights were off, and I was totally zeroed, focused in on this movie. Even though I was watching on such a tiny little screen, it was still the most intense cinematic experience I've ever had. I was shaking. I was literally shaking. Like from the moment it started to the moment it ended. Even in the more quieter scenes where the characters are just talking to each other, I could not stop. The adrenaline was just flowing through me so bad that I just could not stop shaking. How intense and amazing this movie is. Now, this movie also taught me a little lesson that a lot of our taste is informed by our experience. And having been in the musical world and having being a trained instrumentalist for essentially my entire life, I have had a few teachers, one in particular, that was certainly not as psychotic or as militant as Fletcher, but there were definitely some shadows of his personality in this particular teacher. He could he could project as much volume as Fletcher, maybe even more. Arguably, he pushed you beyond your ability, and he was terrifying. So my experience was informative of my taste in this film. Now, like I said, it's been 6 years, so I have sobered up a little bit from this movie. Just a little bit, just a little bit. I no longer shake when I watch it. Well, maybe the end scene still makes me shake, but the entire movie as a whole doesn't make me shake. But I've sobered up a little bit. And I've come to realize that if it wasn't for J.K. Simmons carrying this performance, if it wasn't for his magnetic and absolutely incredible performance, then I think the movie might be a little silly at times. First of all, you're dealing with music, which is there to, give people a sense of purpose and to give them some enjoyment in life. And of course, if you're good enough and if you're passionate enough to make a career out of it. But we're not dealing with national security. We're not dealing with the safety of citizens on a global scale. We're not dealing with things. We're not dealing with life and death. It's just music. Yes, you should take it seriously, but at the end of the day, it is just music. So to really buy into the fact that there is a teacher who is so psychotically laser focused on producing the best jazz band that he can, to the point of slapping students, belittling them by insulting them, going after the fact that their mom walked out, is a little over the top. And if it wasn't for a great actor like J.K. Simmons, it might honestly come across as a little silly. And so, yes, he was perfect for the part. First of all, he looks the part. He's bald, which automatically makes him a whole lot scarier. And he actually did pack on a lot of muscle for this part. For the guy that he is, for the age that he is, I mean, to be able to pack on so much muscle for the part is really impressive. And he was able to do that, I think, when he was in Justice League as well. for his age. It's just amazing how he's able to work out and get so muscular and intimidating. And I like how they, in particular, showed off his biceps. Pretty much in every scene that he's in, you're just like staring at his biceps, like, wow, those are pretty big biceps for a conductor. I mean, all you got to do is wave your arms like this. You don't really need to be, curling dumbbells when you're conducting jazz band. But I guess if you want to throw a steel chair at a student with more velocity, then it does help to be pretty well built. So he's bald, he's very muscular, and he actually has a master's in conducting. There's kind of a funny story where Damien Chazelle, the director, approached J.K. Simmons and he's like, if you're worried about the conducting, like, don't worry about it. We've got good editors, we've got magic, movie magic. It's going to be fine. And J.K. Simmons is like, well, I have a master's in conducting, so I think I got that part covered. J.K. Simmons deservedly gets all the credit, but Miles Teller does a fantastic job as Andrew Neiman. I mean, you want to talk about the fact that with film acting, it's about the art of subtlety. I mean, and it's about show, don't tell. Like, you should project what you're feeling on your face, and there should be like a vibrant inner life of the actor, and needs to project through the character. Miles Teller's got that down pat. I mean, Andrew Neiman, his character is very understated at certain points, but you can tell that he's holding back even though he doesn't want to. And then of course there are other scenes like when he kicks down the kick drum and he tackles Fletcher, where he's like, okay, he's definitely letting go now. He's a very awkward character. He doesn't really know how to traverse the stormy waters of socializing, but he's so grounded in reality that if you've ever gone through situations like that, then you definitely can relate to it. You know exactly what it is that he's going through because Miles Teller puts on such a convincing performance. In other horror performances, the character might have, whined to his parents or maybe cried about what he was going through, but Miles Teller just does such a great job of making it realistic. And I think the realistic way that most kids that age deal with awkwardness, and some even some adults deal with that awkwardness, is that they don't really want to tell anybody. They don't really want to say or express the fact that they're going through some tough times, specifically when they have an ambition that keeps them from socializing. It distances them from most people, but they're willing to do what it takes in order to achieve it. There's also an important dynamic in this film that is sometimes overlooked, that of Andrew and his father. Now, his father represents the more humanitarian, the more humanistic side of ambition, that you probably should have something to balance yourself out. You probably need a family. You need some other things in your life other than just your own ambitions, your own career. Andrew is 100% jazz. That's all he cares about. Yeah, there are some scenes, of course, where he gets a girlfriend, but he eventually breaks up with her because he says, like, I can't have you in my life because drumming is the most important thing to me and I want to be one of the greats. There is a horribly awkward scene where he tries to bring her back into his life, but another testament to Miles Teller's amazing acting is that once she says that, well, I know maybe I can go to your jazz competition because I'll have to check with my boyfriend first. His face says, okay, like, this is some closure. Now I don't need to have her in my life. Now I can just go forward with my own career, my own ambitions. He's almost relieved about the fact that he doesn't have to worry anymore about that societal expectation of having a girlfriend. He doesn't have to worry anymore about having people drag him down with the bothersome and tiresome needs that they have. He just wants to entirely focus on his drumming. And that's also where he and his dad butt heads. And the very last scene of the movie is so important because he literally is standing at a crossroads. He can either go with his dad after Fletcher has humiliated him and not given him a part in front of all of those professional musicians and essentially ruined his career, or he can go back on the stage and prove to Fletcher that he is the Charlie Parker that he's been looking for. He chooses the latter. And his dad also has some interesting tastes in popcorn. I mean, by interesting, I mean, like, I definitely want to try that. I mean, raisinets and popcorn? Has anyone ever had that before? It sounds incredible. And I don't care how many people think that raisinets are gross, okay? I don't understand what's so gross about chocolate-covered raisins. I mean, I've been having them for years. They're delicious. But I've never had raisinets and popcorn. That sounds pretty fantastic. I suppose before I go any further, I should talk about the very few things that I did not like about this movie. And again, there's very few things I didn't like about this movie. The only thing really that keeps this movie from being an enduring and timeless masterpiece are the dub overs, if you will. I don't really know the exact proper term of it, but the dub overs for the instruments. There's a lot of misalignment with the editing and with what the instrumentalists are actually playing. There are plenty of times where if you look, the say a trumpet player, his fingers are not lining up with the music, the saxophone, their keys are not lining up with the music, and in the drumming, which is even more obvious, sometimes it doesn't line up at all. So that is a little distracting. Also, the scene where Fletcher just kind of rudely bursts into the lower jazz band and kind of takes over. I mean, I guess it makes sense because his character is not exactly polite and doesn't exactly care about the emotions and or needs of other people, and it seems like he has some kind of rapport with the jazz instructor anyway. In any case, when he goes down the line and asks the instrumentalist to play a certain part of the music, he gets to the first trumpet player. Sounds beautiful. He gets to the second player, and it sounds like he is like playing in a sewer. Like it sounds like his mouth, he like accidentally put a trombone mouthpiece in the trumpet mouthpiece and is like trying to play it that way. Didn't the movie establish that this is like the top music conservatory in the nation? I mean, I don't care like how much of a low band you're in. If you're in the top conservatory in the nation, you're going to sound a whole lot better than that. I realize, of course, that they're trying to explicitly illustrate when musicians can't be up to par with others, because there are, of course, plenty of people in the audience who are not musically trained and they don't have that understanding. But for the majority of the audience that goes to see this movie, I'm going to go ahead and assume that they know something about music, and to hear that kind of playing is just hilarious. Fletcher also has a bit of a double standard in that scene in the rehearsal where he goes down the trombone lines and kicks out that one kid because he's out of tune. How come he didn't kick out Parker for coming in early? I mean, really, if your standards are that if you play out of tune, you're out of rehearsal. Well, shouldn't it be the equivalent of that if you come in early or if you come in late, you're out of rehearsal? There's also another low point in the movie, and I use the word low point very loosely because this movie is just so fantastic. There's hardly any scene that you could even barely call a low point, but it's the dinner scene. It's a little too on the nose. Now, I do appreciate the fact that it gives light to the societal mentality that musicians are just kind of musicians doing their own weird thing. But sports, people who are professional athletes, now that is where the real glory is. Now, of course, it's kind of, if you wanted to compare the two, it's kind of like apples and oranges. I mean, musicians, of course, are not nearly as athletically inclined. I mean, we all, with the exception of percussionists, sit in chairs the entire time. But it certainly does take some athleticism, or at least it takes some lung capacity if you're a wind player, and especially once you go down to the lower instruments like trombone and tuba. And it also takes some, virtuosic dexterity if you're a string player, and some incredible shoulder endurance if you're going to, be playing the violin for an hour and a half when you're playing a Beethoven symphony. Now, sports, of course, is an entirely different thing. It might not be as intellectually demanding, depending on what sport you play, but it is certainly much more physically demanding. So I don't think that athletes get more attention because of what they're doing. I think it's just the business. People can more so easily relate to sports than they can to musicians that are of the classical and jazz genre. Understanding classical music takes some research, and it also takes the courage and also maybe the inclination to know that you're not exactly mainstream, but to enjoy sports. I mean, everyone enjoys sports. It's such a social thing to do. At least it is these days. You can just have it on the TV and you can attach yourself to a team if you want. When I hear the argument that, teachers should get paid as much as athletes, or musicians should get paid as much as athletes, it's like, well, it's not their skill, it's not their ability, it's just the culture that's built around those things. In any case, the dinner scene also gives a sign that Andrew is just as much of a sociopath as Fletcher, because when the guy asks him if he has any friends, he says no. He's like, why not? And he says, I'm going to assume unironically, I've just never really seen the need. Friends are not a need, they're a gift. But Andrew doesn't see it that way. And he has no qualms at all with feeling slighted and then going after these two kids who are only in Division 3 sports. It's not even Division 2, it's Division 3. I also wish that that particular scene would have made it a bit more clear what Andrew was saying when the two kids are like, come play with us. And then Andrew says, 4 words you will never hear from the NFL. I don't think I'm alone in thinking that what Andrew meant was those are 4 words you will never hear from the NFL. Come play with us. But when I saw it, I thought it was like 4 words, semicolon, you will never hear from the NFL. And I was like, so, okay, that's more than 4 words. Are you just intentionally pointing out how stupid they are, or what's going on here? So I wish that the dialogue had been a little more clear with that, but I get it now. The breakup scene between Andrew and Nicole is so awkward because it is so realistic. That's how people break up, especially if they're in a public place. Melissa Benoist, I've heard it so many different ways, but I think it's Benoist because she herself said that's how her family referred to their last name growing up. In any case, she does a fantastic job of acting. It's just like the way that her face drops, like you can tell that when they sat down, she had a lot of anticipatory joy. Like she was like, okay, I'm going to sit here with my boyfriend. This is going to be fun. We're going to catch up. I barely get to see him. This is going to be great. And then he says, oh, by the way, I'm breaking up with you. And the way her face just slowly drops as the realization comes over her, the searing pain and rage in her eyes is great. But I think it's what she says after that that is such a testament to the amazing dialogue and acting, is that she doesn't exactly know the right words to say. Like there's no discussion when it comes to breakups. Like people, I mean, if it's a nasty breakup, that is, people just kind of say whatever comes to their mind. It might exactly not make sense, but they just don't know what to do because they're so hurt. So they just kind of yell at each other. So like when she says, you know that I did a little Obama gesture there. She says like, you know that I would hinder you from becoming a success. You know that for a fact. Like, you don't really say you know that for a fact, like when you're in a general argument with somebody, but when you're so hurt, you don't really know what to think or what to say or what to do. So you say things like that. It's just one more element of what adds to the ultra and refreshing realism of the scene. I like how Damien Chazelle gives you little hints that perhaps Fletcher does indeed have a soul. Perhaps he's not just entirely about jazz. Perhaps he does actually, care about other human beings, where he plays the CD of Sean. And he's so heartbroken because Sean has died. Of course, he lies to his band that, Sean died in a car crash because there's no way that he could ever admit that, oh, by the way, Sean hung himself and it was probably my fault. But I don't know if he was necessarily crying over the loss of a student. I think that it is inherently sad to him that one of his students died so horribly, but I think he was really crying because he thought that this was going to be his Charlie Parker. He thought that this kid was going to be the one that I'm looking for, and then he was taken away. And the reason why I think that is because in the ensuing scene, he snaps a little. He thinks, okay, well, he's not my Charlie Parker. He's the closest I ever got. So now I'm going to drive Neiman even harder. I'm going to make sure, beyond the shadow of doubt, I'm going to make him literally bleed so that he can prove to me that he's my Charlie Parker. I'm going to sit here for over 4 or 5 hours, I guess. I mean, if they started at 9 and they started rehearsal officially at like 2:15, it was over 5 hours. I'm going to make these three rotate for over 5 hours. I'm going to make them sweat. I'm going to make them bleed. I'm going to play a cowbell in his ear. I'm going to throw his drum over to the wall so that he can really prove to me that he's my Charlie Parker. So I think that's the scene where Fletcher really snapped. I don't entirely think that he was crying so much just because he lost a student. I think he was crying so much because he was this close to getting his Charlie Parker, and it failed. As intense as this movie is, I really admire it for bringing the film down to a breathable position and almost bring it to a grinding halt. Andrew is kicked out of the school for attacking Fletcher. Fletcher is playing jazz and he's conducting a little bit. And you think that Andrew's life is over, and as an audience member, you're wondering like, how can this be? Like, how can it end here? It simply can't end here. And then he goes into the bar where Fletcher's playing, and they sit down and they talk, and everything seems wonderful. Everything seems extremely friendly, and you kind of get the heart and the soul of the movie. The question is, how do the ends justify the means, especially when you are pushing people to greatness? Is it deserved that you put someone through such horrible circumstances and verbal abuse, sometimes physical abuse, just to push them beyond what's expected of them and to turn them into someone who's great? Would the next Charlie Parker actually become discouraged? In other words, good job actually really the two most harmful words in the English language? Again, it really depends on what the situation is. If you're in the military, that's an entirely different thing. I have absolutely no military experience, so I can't exactly speak to it. But if you're in the arts, of course you should push people beyond what is expected of them, because that's where the magic happens, not only for the performance, but for them personally. To have a student and for them to realize that they can do more than they ever thought they could, that's amazing. That's magical for both the student and the teacher. If you push them to such an extent that it's no longer about them, it's just about the success, that's where I think you cross a line. If you will stop at nothing for them to be a great player rather than to be a great person, I think that's where you have gotten a little too invested into what you're doing. You need to take a step back, and you need to realize that it's ultimately about turning that person into the best version of themselves. That's what teaching is about. Besides which, there are plenty of people who do in fact get discouraged. It's not about just finding that one or maybe two once in a lifetime generational talents. I mean, it's about making students feel safe enough so that they can understand that I can enjoy this music and I don't have to be the best. Like, I can just enjoy whatever it is I'm doing. The last scene is one of the greatest, most thrilling, most exciting movie scenes of all time. No matter how many times I watch this movie, even if I watch this particular scene in isolation, I will never get bored of this scene. And I love how they build it up too. Like, between Andrew and Fletcher, it seems pretty friendly. Like, it seems like they've buried the hatchet, it's all over, and maybe Fletcher himself, does actually, maybe he is human. Maybe he is actually kind of nice. You never really know. And I also love how right before they get on stage, Fletcher is talking to these professional musicians, and he's like, "Oh yeah, by the way, if you mess up, your career is over. Good to go? Okay, let's have some fun." But then Andrew gets onto the stage. Fletcher comes up to him and he says, "I know it was you." And then as an audience member, you're just like, "Oh no." Nope. Turns out Fletcher isn't nice after all. He just pulled off his most brilliant plan yet. And I'm so glad that Tom Cross won Best Editing for this movie, because really all he had to show was like 30 to 60 seconds of the last scene. I mean, it's just an incredible homage to the art of editing. It's just the way the camera is constantly splicing between instruments and the way it's landing when a hit lands. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to watch, and it makes it so much more exciting. I love the little bit where Andrew is playing drums. He's playing his solo, and he's just really getting into it. He's going crazy, and then like the sound kind of fades away, and you just hear like this wind, this kind of like audible whooshing sound. I feel like that's where Andrew has reached nirvana. Like, he's not even trying to drum. Like, he just is drumming. He is the drum set. The first time I watched this movie, I remember I was watching the scene and my face was like this. And then once Andrew hits the final crash and it cuts to credits, I was like... And I think I just wanted some kind of resolution between Andrew and Fletcher. I wanted them to meet up afterwards and be like, "Hey, I still hate you, by the way." Or maybe they can meet up afterwards and be like, "You're it. Like, you're my Charlie Parker. And like, good luck to you, man." But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that that kind of ending just wouldn't really work, because it's like, that's the point of the movie. The point of the movie is for you to decide, which opposing force do you side with? Are you with Fletcher in that the ends justify the means, no matter what the means may be? Or are you more so with the dad in that, like, okay, you need some kind of balance. Like, you shouldn't endure this. You shouldn't endure this kind of abuse. And if they were to give some kind of post showdown with Andrew and Fletcher, I don't think anything would be resolved. You might even have like an additional movie involving all that dialogue. I just now realized that there could be a Whiplash 2. That'd be interesting. I'm still waiting for a movie to be as intense as Whiplash. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but I'm certainly glad that this one exists. I would highly recommend this movie to anybody and everyone, and especially if you're a musician, especially if you're a jazz musician, especially if you're a jazz drummer. Go ahead and check this one out. And I'm giving this one a 9.7 out of 10. So have you guys seen Whiplash? What are your thoughts on it? Whatever they are, let me know down in the comments below. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. I truly appreciate it, and I'll see you on the next cinematic adventure. Yeah, it's about his tempo.